The Empire thought Earth had no fleet. Then 11,000 human dreadnoughts left the dark. The room had not been activated in 31 years. It existed 3 levels beneath the grand deliberation chamber of the Vaelthari Senate, behind doors sealed with diplomatic-grade encryption and blast shielding rated for orbital bombardment. It had no windows. It had no designation in official records. It was the place where the Empire went when it was afraid. Grand Senator Orvan Thelk sat at the head of the obsidian table and said nothing. Around him, 11 of the most powerful figures in Vaelthar civilization stared at a projection that covered every wall, every ceiling panel, every surface that could carry an image. The footage had been running on a loop for 40 minutes. No one had asked for it to stop. No one had spoken. On the screen, a battle played out in silence. 7th Vanguard Fleet, 43 warships, the finest force projection capability the Vaelthari Empire had deployed in 200 years. The fleet that had pacified the Dalari Confederacy, absorbed the Greth worlds, and convinced 6 independent civilizations to sign integration accords without firing a single weapon. They had been sent to a frontier star system to deliver an integration notice, a routine assignment. The system's primary civilization had no faster-than-light capability on record. No military, no orbital defenses. They barely had satellites. The footage showed 7th Vanguard Fleet arriving at the edge of the system in standard formation. Then it showed one ship, one human ship, sitting between the fleet and the 3rd planet. It was not in the Vaelthari database. It did not match any known hull configuration. It was long and dark and narrow, built in a way that looked almost organic, like someone had grown it rather than constructed it. Its drive signature was wrong. Its emissions profile was wrong. Even the way it held position was wrong. Not the careful station keeping of a vessel trying to stay still, but the absolute motionlessness of something that simply did not need to move. Fleet Admiral Doroth Vel's voice came through on the recovered auto, sharp and professional. Unregistered vessel, you are in the path of an Imperial formation. Identify yourself and move to safety distance immediately. There was a pause. Then the human vessel responded. The voice was calm female, slightly tired in the way soldiers sound when they have been on deployment for a long time. This is Commander Vera Osi, IUSN Carrier Destroyer Inexorable. You are in restricted approach space for the Sol system. Reduce speed and transmit your authorization codes. Fleet Admiral Vel had not reduced speed. Grand Senator Thelk watched the footage for the 11th time and still could not understand what happened next. The Vaelthari flagship, the Eternal Mandate, had been a vessel that could crack a moon. It had taken 11 seconds to stop transmitting. Not 11 seconds after the human ship fired. 11 seconds after the human ship finished speaking. There had been no visible weapon discharge. There had been no impact flash. The Eternal Mandate had simply gone quiet. Then the power signature, enormous and stable a moment before, had dropped to nothing. 11 seconds. The destroyers flanking it lasted between 3 and 4 minutes. They managed to maneuver. They managed to return fire. The sensor logs showed their weapons striking something, an energy barrier, maybe, or a localized field of some kind, and scattering harmlessly. Their own drives began failing in sequence. Not explosively, not with fire, simply stopping, like machines that had been switched off. 43 ships, 1 human vessel, 37 of the fleet had been fully disabled. Engines dead, weapons offline. Life support still running, 6 had escaped. Those 6 ships were the reason this room was active. Play the last transmission again, said Thelk. The audio officer obeyed. Commander Osi's voice filled the room once more. This is Commander Vera Osi, IUSN Inexorable. Your remaining vessels are free to leave. We have recorded this engagement. We will be sending a full account to whoever authorized this approach. I suggest you tell them what happened here. We would prefer not to have this conversation again. Then the channel had closed. The room was quiet for a long time. She knew 6 ships survived, said Intelligence Director Farah Sand slowly. She let them go deliberately. She wanted them to report, said Deputy Senator Kalev Ornath. Thelk stared at the frozen image of the Inexorable. It had not moved from its position throughout the entire engagement. When the last surviving Vaelthari ship crossed the system boundary, it had still been there, watching. Waiting, he said. Find out what Sol is. The archivists worked through the night cycle. What they found arrived on Thelk's desk 6 hours later in a sealed brief, and when he read it, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Survey record, Sol System, third planet, designation Earth, filed 247 years ago by the Vaelthari Expansion Survey Corps. The surveyor's notes were brief and clinical. Pre-spaceflight civilization, fractured into nation-states, high internal conflict, no unified government, no space defense and timeline. 80 to 120 years once FTL contact established. Risk assessment, negligible. Recommended follow-up survey, standard interval, non-priority. The survey had been filed and forgotten. For 247 years, no one had gone back. Now Thelk looked at the engagement data again. At the vessel that had disabled 43 Vaelthari warships in 4 minutes. At the calm voice of the commander who had let the survivors go as a message. He pulled up a secondary analysis his intelligence staff had prepared during the night. They had enhanced the sensor imagery from the 6 surviving ships as they fled. They had pointed their arrays back at the Sol system as they accelerated away from it. Earth's orbit was not empty. The preliminary count was still being refined, but the number coming back from the imagery analysts made no sense. There were structures everywhere, orbital rings, station clusters, traffic patterns that indicated a civilization operating at scale, across not just their home world but their entire solar system. There were heat signatures on the Jovian moons. There were industrial emissions from the asteroid belt. There were at least 4 separate objects in Earth orbit that the analysts could not classify, because nothing in the Vaelthari database had a comparable mass-to-energy ratio. And there were ships, many ships. Most of them were not showing drive signatures. They were simply sitting there in configurations that looked like formations to a trained military eye. Dark, silent, present. The analyst who had compiled the brief had written a single note at the bottom of her assessment. The Inexorable was not their fleet. The Inexorable was a border patrol vessel. Thelk put down the brief. He called Ambassador Lore Vash. Lore Vash had spent 40 years as an Imperial diplomat. She had negotiated the absorption of civilizations that had been spacefaring for centuries. She had sat across tables from species that communicated in chemical signatures, in light patterns, in subsonic resonance. She had read every piece of xenological literature the Empire had produced. She had never been afraid of first contact. She was afraid now. She stood in the briefing room and listened to Director Sand walk through the intelligence summary, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. The distinct sense that she was entirely out of her depth. "Our assignment," said Sand, "is not to negotiate integration. Our assignment is to make contact, success, and most importantly, to understand what we are dealing with before the Senate decides anything further." "What am I authorized to offer?" asked Vash. "Nothing. You are authorized to listen." The diplomatic vessel assigned to her was stripped of weapons, reinforced with redundant communication arrays, and painted in the white and silver that served as the Vaelthari's signal for non-hostile approach across 42 contacted civilizations. She was given a crew of 12, including 2 xenolinguists, 3 behavioral analysts, and a military attaché named Commander Rethan Solav, who had survived 7th Vanguard Fleet aboard one of the 6 ships that escaped. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone in the briefing room knew why Solav was included. If the humans recognized him, Vash needed to know what that meant. The transit took 11 days. Vash spent them reading everything the Empire had, which was almost nothing. A 247-year-old survey report, the engagement footage, the sound of Commander Osi's voice. She spent a great deal of time on that voice. "We would prefer not to have this conversation again." Not a threat, not a boast, a preference. That word, she decided, was doing enormous work. They came out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system and immediately began passive scanning. Vash stood at the forward observation post and watched the data come in. The preliminary imagery had not prepared her. Earth's system was alive in a way she had never seen outside the Vaelthari core worlds. The traffic density in the inner system was staggering. Tens of thousands of vessels moving in patterns so organized they resembled the flow dynamics of liquid through a channel. The orbital infrastructure around Earth was visible to the naked eye. a faint ring of light visible even from this distance. The gas giants trailed signatures of industry. The asteroid belt, which should have been empty rock, was a working landscape. "They are younger than us by 2,000 years, said one of her analysts quietly. "How?" Her sensor officer spoke before she could answer. "Ambassador, I'm reading warship signatures." He paused. "Many warship signatures." He looked up from his console. He looked like he wanted to say something reassuring and could not find the words. "They're not on an approach vector," he said finally. "They are holding position. Multiple positions. Throughout the system. How many?" Another pause. "Our count is still increasing." Vash nodded slowly. "Keep counting." 40 minutes later, her communications array received a tight beam signal from the direction of the third planet. It was on a standard Vaelthari diplomatic frequency. The humans had known which frequency to use. They had prepared for this. The message was brief. "Vaelthari diplomatic vessel. This is the United Earth Office of First Contact. We received your fleet's report. We have been expecting contact from your government. Please proceed to the following coordinates. You will be met. Minister Jakob Varro, Office of First Contact, Earth." Vash read the message 3 times. "They have an Office of First Contact," said her senior xenolinguist. "Yes," said Vash. "A standing office, with a minister, yes." The analyst sat back. They built a diplomatic institution for exactly this situation. They were ready. Vash thought about the inexorable sitting motionless between a 43-ship fleet and its home planet. About a commander who had let 6 ships leave so they could deliver a message. About an Office of First Contact waiting calmly for the inevitable arrival of an Imperial diplomat. "They have been ready," she said, "for a very long time." The neutral station they were directed to was not neutral at all. Of course, it was human-built, human-controlled, and positioned at the L4 point of Earth's moon, which meant it had a direct sightline to what Vash's sensors were now conservatively estimating as 800 warships in lunar orbital positions. But the human diplomats called it a neutral station, and Vash accepted the fiction gratefully, because it was the kind of fiction that allowed both sides to keep talking. Minister Jakob Varro was not what she expected. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples, and the particular kind of stillness that came from having made important decisions under pressure for many years. He wore no ceremonial clothing. He carried no visible status markers. He came with 2 aides and 1 other person, a woman in a dark uniform who stood slightly apart and said nothing. Vash recognized the uniform. IUSN Interplanetary United Systems Navy. She recognized the face. She had watched that face in sensor footage for 11 days. She had heard that voice so many times she could reproduce the inflections from memory. Commander Vera Osei stood against the wall of the meeting room and watched the Vaelthari delegation with the particular expression of someone who has nothing to prove and knows it. Vash took her seat. She made no sign that she had recognized Osei. Osei made no sign that she expected recognition. Rethan Salav, her military attaché, had gone the color of old ash. Varro poured water, or something that looked like water, into 2 glasses and pushed one across the table. It was, Vash realized, a gesture of hospitality that assumed she had a mouth and used it for drinking. They had done their research. "Ambassador Vash," said Varro, "welcome to Lagrange Station. We appreciate you making the trip." "Minister Varro," she said, "thank you for receiving us." "Of course." He folded his hands on the table. His voice was pleasant and perfectly level. "We have questions, Ambassador. I imagine you do as well. I'd suggest we begin with the most direct one, since I've found that direct questions save significant time." He paused. "Why did your warships approach our home system without requesting contact first?" Vash spent 3 days on that station. The questions Varro asked were not accusations. They were precise, calm, and devastating in the way that only honest questions can be. He wanted to know if membership in the Vaelthari Empire was voluntary. He wanted to know what had happened to civilizations that had declined integration. He wanted specific examples with specific outcomes. He wanted to know if the ships that had approached Sol had been carrying integration notices or weapons. He wanted to know why a 43-ship fleet had been considered appropriate for contact with a civilization that had never been assessed beyond a 247-year-old preliminary survey. He asked if the Empire considered humanity its equal. He asked it simply, without emotion, and waited. Vash found, when she tried to answer, that she did not have a response that satisfied her. On the second day, she walked with Varro to an observation window that looked out over the station's exterior docking ring, and she saw 3 human warships up close for the first time. She had assumed the inexorable was large. It was not. These 3 vessels made the inexorable look like a courier. They were vast in the way that natural features were vast. Not built-looking, but present in the way that mountains were present, in the way that a fact was present. Their hull markings were minimal. Their weapons were not deployed. They simply existed there, a very short distance away, being the size they were. "Those are Goliath class," said Varro, following her gaze. "We've had them for about 30 years. She looked at him. "The Inexorable," said carefully, "is not a Goliath class." "No," said Varro. "The Inexorable is a Javelin class carrier destroyer. We have about 400 of them on active patrol rotation." She looked back at the 3 ships outside the window. "What class," she said, "is larger than the Goliath class?" Varro smiled. It was a small smile, not unkind. "Ambassador, I think that's a question for a later conversation, when we have established more trust." That night, alone in her assigned quarters, Vash sent an encrypted transmission to Grand Senator Thelk. She said, "We need to talk about how this ends, and we need to have that conversation before the Senate does anything else." She pressed send. She stared at the wall for a long time. She thought, "I hope it's not already too late." It was nearly too late. She didn't know it yet, but 12 light years away, in a secure session of the Vaelthari Grand Senate, a faction she had spent 30 years watching with carefully controlled alarm, had finally found enough votes. Grand Senator Orvan Thelk had argued for caution. He had argued for patience. He had argued that the engagement footage alone should give the Senate sufficient reason to approach this situation with extraordinary care. Deputy Senator Kalev Ornath had argued that the Empire could not be seen to negotiate from weakness, that allowing a primitive border patrol vessel to disable 43 Imperial warships without response would send a message to every civilization in the Empire and every civilization outside it, that the correct response was not diplomacy. The correct response was a demonstration of Imperial reach, conducted quietly, far from the human homeworld, against a soft target, a mining installation, a colony world, a supply route, something that would communicate clearly, without provoking the kind of direct confrontation that the footage suggested might go poorly. The vote had been close. The order had gone out 36 hours before Vash's encrypted message arrived. Fleet Group 11, 68 ships, target, human colony installation, Proxima Station, designated as a civilian supply hub. The mission parameters specified a show of force. No casualties if avoidable. But the installation was to be seized. They were already moving. Technician First Class Dara Cho was not supposed to be on duty. She was covering a colleague's shift at the deep-range sensor station on Titan platform. And she was 30 minutes from handing off to the morning crew. And she almost missed it because she was tired and thinking about breakfast. But the pattern caught her eye. Not a signal. Not a weapon signature. Not anything the automated threat detection protocols were trained to flag. Just movement. 68 heat signatures at a specific transit vector, moving in a configuration that a sensor specialist with 6 years of experience reading Vaelthari ship movements would recognize as a fleet formation rather than commercial traffic. She ran the calculation twice. Then she called her shift supervisor. Then her shift supervisor called Fleet Command. Fleet Command ran the calculation 3 times. Then someone very senior made a phone call. The colony at Proxima had 14,000 civilians. The Vaelthari fleet would arrive in approximately 46 hours. Vera Osi had been sleeping for the first time in 4 days when the priority signal woke her. She read it in her bunk without moving, in the red emergency lighting of the Inexorable's captain's quarters, and then she was up and dressed and moving before the second alarm sounded. She walked onto the bridge and looked at her tactical display. "Nav," she said, "get me a solution to Proxima." "Already plotted, Commander." She looked at her communications officer. "Get me Minister Varro. He's already on channel." Varro's voice came through, clipped and awake. He had clearly not been sleeping either, Commander. You've seen the movement. I've seen it. We've been trying to reach Ambassador Vash. She wasn't informed of this order. I know. We're preparing a final communication to the Vaelthari Senate. I wanted your input on the language before it went out. Osi looked at the tactical display. 68 ships, 46 hours, 14,000 people at Proxima. Tell them, she said, exactly where their ships are. Tell them we know. Tell them how long they have. And tell them we would prefer this ends without us having to make the same argument we made last time. That's what I was thinking. Send it. The message went out on an Imperial diplomatic frequency, tight-beamed directly to the Vaelthari Senate chamber. The translation was precise. The tone was, as Minister Varro described it in his notes, politely inexorable. To the Vaelthari Grand Senate. Your Fleet Group 11 is currently transiting toward Proxima Station, a civilian installation. We know their position, their vector, and their arrival time. This message is being sent 44 hours and 17 minutes before their projected arrival. We ask that you recall them. We have had one conversation about how we respond when warships approach our people. We would prefer not to require a second one. Minister Jakub Varro, United Earth Office of First Contact. In the sealed room beneath the Senate chamber, Grand Senator Thelk read the message and felt something he had not felt since before he was elected to office. He felt what it was like to be outmatched. They knew. They had known almost immediately. The movement of 68 ships, coordinated in deep space at a distance of 12 light-years, had been detected before the fleet had completed even a third of its transit, and the humans had not scrambled. They had not launched a counterfleet. They had sent a polite message. The message said, more clearly than any weapon could say it, "We see you. We have seen you the whole time. We are not afraid. We are giving you a chance. Recall the fleet," said Thelk. Deputy Senator Ornath stood up. "The Senate will not. I am not asking the Senate," said Thelk. "I am issuing an emergency executive order under Imperial security law. The fleet is to be recalled now." He looked around the table. "And if anyone in this room sends a counterorder, I will show them the full sensor analysis of the Sol system that my intelligence staff completed this morning. After they have read it, I will ask them again if they want to continue this discussion." Nobody asked. The recall order went out. It arrived at Fleet Group 11 with 19 hours to spare. Fleet Admiral Gessertov, commanding Fleet Group 11, read the order and then read the human message that had been attached as explanation. He sat with it for a long time. Then he gave the order to reverse course. He never found out what the humans had been waiting for him with. He thought, probably, that was the point. Ambassador Vash received confirmation of the recall while she was still on Lagrange Station. Minister Varro received the same confirmation 30 seconds later from a different source. He came to find her in the observation lounge. They sat together at the window for a while, looking out at the 3 Goliath-class ships that were still there, still present, still saying nothing by their presence except, "We are here. I have to ask you something," said Varro, after a time. "Yes. Did you know the fleet was moving?" Vash considered the question. Considered, more specifically, whether honesty was the right choice, and decided that at this particular moment in history, it was the only choice. "No," she said. "I did not," Varro nodded. "But you suspected something like it was possible." She was quiet for a moment. "There are factions in my government," she said, "that I have been concerned about for a long time." "Yes." Varro looked at the ships outside the window. He looked like a man doing arithmetic, not with numbers but with decisions. "Ambassador," he said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand that I'm telling you because I believe it will help both our peoples, not because I'm trying to frighten you." She waited. "When our sensor analyst detected your fleet, we had 46 hours before they reached Proxima Station." He paused. "We had the assets to intercept them in 11. She held very still. "We didn't scramble those assets," he continued. "We sent a message instead, because we would rather talk than fight. We have always preferred that. But I want you to go home, Ambassador, with a clear understanding of what it means when we say we prefer something." He looked at her directly. "It means we have considered the alternative. It means we have the alternative ready. It means the only reason the alternative is not already happening is because we are choosing, actively, every single time, not to use it. Vash looked at the ships. She thought about the count that her sensor officer was still updating. The number that had kept climbing for 11 days and had not stopped. "I understand," she said. "I think," said Varro, "that you do." She returned home. She delivered her report in person to Grand Senator Thelk and the full Security Council. And she did not soften it, and she did not spare them. She told them about the Office of First Contact, which had been waiting. She told them about the orbital infrastructure, which was decades old. She told them about the Goliath-class ships, which were not the largest class. She told them about the 11 hours. She told them about what it meant when humans said they preferred something. Then she put down her notes and said, "We surveyed this system 247 years ago, and we wrote that they were no threat. We forgot about them. They did not forget about us. They built for us. They prepared for us. And when we arrived with 43 warships to deliver an integration notice to a civilization we had never spoken to, they sent one ship, one patrol vessel, and it was enough." She looked around the table. The first ship was not their strongest. It was not their largest. It was not their newest. It was a border patrol vessel that was in the right place at the right time. And it disabled our fleet the way a guard dog inconveniences a burglar, not because it is the most dangerous thing in the house, but because it is the first thing at the door. Silence. "I recommend," she said, "that we find out what is in the rest of the house before we knock again." 3 months later, negotiations opened formally. They took place on Lagrange Station. Both sides sent full diplomatic delegations. The humans brought legal scholars, economists, and historians alongside their diplomats. They were extraordinarily well prepared. They had clearly been thinking about this moment for a very long time. They did not agree to integration. They did not refuse it either. They proposed, instead, something the Vaelthari had never encountered. A mutual recognition treaty between equals with voluntary trade provisions, shared navigation rights, and a mutual non-aggression framework that contained a clause so simply worded, it took Vash's legal team 4 days to understand the full implication. The clause read, "In the event of any hostile action by either party against the civilian populations of the other, the injured party reserves the right to respond with all available means." All available means. Vash had read those 3 words many times. She thought about a sensor analyst on a platform around a gas giant, working a night shift for a colleague, catching a pattern in deep space traffic that should have been invisible. She thought about 11 hours. She thought about a question she still had not answered. What was larger than a Goliath-class warship? She had not asked again. She thought it was probably better not to know. Back in the sealed room beneath the Senate chamber, the walls were dark now. The emergency was over for the moment. Grand Senator Orvan Thelk sat alone at the obsidian table and looked at the final intelligence summary that had been placed on his desk. His analysts, given 3 months and full sensor access from every available asset, had done their best. The final tally of confirmed warship signatures in the Sol system was 11,240. Not all of them were active. Not all of them were large. But they were there, distributed throughout the system in formations that suggested permanent deployment rather than recent mobilization. Many of them had been there for a long time. Decades, possibly. They had always been there, sitting in the dark, waiting. The humans had not assembled their fleet when the Empire arrived. They had not scrambled to defend themselves. They had not needed to. They had simply turned on the lights. Below the sensor count, his lead analyst had written a short note. Recommend full update to Earth survey file. Previous threat assessment negligible was filed 247 years ago. Current recommended classification. See attached. Note. The fleet visible to our sensors represents confirmed assets only. We have no basis for estimating unconfirmed assets. We cannot confirm that everything in the Sol system that is a weapon is visible to our sensors. We cannot confirm that the Sol system contains all human military assets. We have no data on assets beyond Sol system. Recommend, do not test further. Thelk looked at the file for a long time. Then he opened the Earth survey record and navigated to the threat assessment field. He deleted the word negligible. He sat for a moment. Then he typed 2 words, saved the file, and closed it. He sat in the quiet room and thought about the history of the Vaelthari Empire. 2,000 years of expansion, absorption, integration, dominion, and about a pale blue world that had spent 247 years being forgotten, building in the dark, waiting with a patience that no civilization in the Empire had ever matched. They had not come looking for the galaxy. The galaxy had come looking for them. And they had been ready. Somewhere in the Sol system, 11,000 dreadnoughts held position in the dark, as they had held position for years, as they would hold position for years more, saying nothing, threatening nothing, simply existing in the vast and quiet way that real power existed, not in the noise it made, but in the silence it could afford. The Empire had finally updated its records under Earth in the threat assessment field. Grand Senator Orvan Thelk had written 2 words, "Do not." End